Welcome to the 108th episode of the Sales Podcast. I'm Wes Schaefer, the Sales Whisperer, your host. Today we have Mr. Nolan Peterson. He is an Air Force Academy grad like me, just 12 years younger, but not any more handsome, okay? I'm going to put that out there. That's a fact, even if you ask my wife. He had an interesting journey so far that is continuing. He was a fighter pilot. He went, before he went to pilot training, went and got an advanced degree in Paris, of all places, then became a special operations combat pilot with tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he left. He, as a pilot in the Air Force, especially as an academy grad, your path is pretty well laid out if you want to follow it. Easily a 20-year career. But he left. He saw things happening in the war. He saw things happening with our nation, with our government, and he wanted to have a bigger impact. And he is doing that as a combat journalist. So he's got a great story of what it takes to get out and make things happen, how to leave the quote-unquote security of a certain career path behind to go, what he says, go be bold and make a difference. And so I think you can get a lot out of this as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as an American. You know what? If you're not an American listening to this, if you like the entrepreneurial spirit, the American pioneer spirit, which I think is hand in hand with the entrepreneurial spirit, then you will get a lot out of this interview. So without further ado, here's Nolan. Nolan Peterson, world traveler, fellow USAFA alum. Welcome to the Sales Podcast, man. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Well, for those that don't know you, they are in for a treat. This will be kind of a unique interview. I've been following your, exploits, endeavors, almost trying to get killed in the Ukraine. So, I won't steal your thunder. I'll let you kind of get into it. But for those that don't know you, would you take a minute or two, kind of tell us who you are and what you do, and we'll dive into it?
All right. Well, I've got a pretty eclectic background. I graduated from the zoo in 2004, the Air Force Academy. And then I lived in Paris, France for a few years, going through grad school for the first time, studying international politics at the Sorbonne. After that, I came back and moved from Paris, France to Mississippi for pilot training.
Hey!
That was probably the most severe cultural transition of my life.
Well, you finally had some good cooking.
Yeah, well, my habits of fine wine and cheese didn't translate into the backwoods of Mississippi. But, so I went through Air Force pilot training and then went and flew for special ops for a bit. I did the standard deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. And then in 2011, I got out of the military and decided that I wanted to become a journalist of all things. And that was mainly...
Of course.
Yeah. I decided to become the enemy, basically. But that was mainly inspired by the fact that when I would come back from Iraq or Afghanistan or any of my trips around the world, I always felt like I had a story, and those stories changed the way I saw the world. And I thought that many people don't have the ability or I guess you could call it the fortune, if you want to call it that, to experience some of these things and to see these places and to have their perspectives change like I had. So as a journalist, you have the ability to sort of educate people about the realities of the world. That was the ideal dream. So I went to journalism school at Northwestern, got a master's from Northwestern in journalism, and then got out and tried to get my foot in the door of becoming a conflict journalist. But what I found out after a while was that most of the major news outlets don't value real, embedded, deep, hard-hitting journalism anymore. I went to Afghanistan in 2013 as a freelancer, writing stories for United Press International, and I had to pay my own way to Afghanistan and to buy my own body armor. Wow. I had to pay for my own repatriation insurance, all these expenses I had to pay up front, with the hope that I could sell some stories over there. And it was a little bit disconcerting that somebody like myself, who's former special ops pilot, couldn't even get an assignment to cover the war in Afghanistan. And I was coming out of Northwestern School of Journalism. They tout themselves as the #1 journalism school in the world and all this. and I still couldn't get a paid assignment. So I just it was curious in my mind why there was so little interest in this type of journalism. And then I also noticed that my stories from Afghanistan were very contrary to the stories of the other news outlets that were there, most of the Western news outlets. Particularly, there was a big uptick in Taliban attacks while I was there, and I saw some of those attacks. And most media outlets were saying that this is an indication the war was falling apart, whereas from my perspective, it was a sign that the Taliban was sort of backed into a corner, like a dog in a corner, in their death throes, basically, and this is their last attempt to hurt us before we pull out. So anyway, I came back and decided to launch my own news site on the premise that military veterans report on war differently than civilians who have never known war, who have no experience in military culture or the realities of deploying around the world to all the spots that we've been lucky enough to visit.
Right.
And so I launched BlueForceTracker.com with this idea that to sort of bridge that gap of the real world experiences of people who have served with civilians for whom wars and military service is mainly an abstraction, to kind of bridge that divide and make these topics and these regions more real for most people by having people tell the news who really know what the dynamics of these places are and who have a real world experience of what it's like to be in war. And so our first big assignment for Blue Force Tracker was for me to go to Ukraine and to report on the war there. And so that experience, I think, if I could sum it up in one sentence, is just it's a story that we should be paying attention to, because this could be 1938 right now.
Right. So are you telling me you report differently than Christian Amanpour?
Slightly, yes.
Eating a souffle? Oh, man. So what possessed you? I mean, you're a pilot. You're an Air Force Academy grad. I mean, dude, your ticket was punched. I mean, you could have done 20 years, probably made it to 06, had a nice cushy retirement, and you left it all behind. What the heck?
Trust me, I wake up every morning, I stare in the mirror, I'm like, what was I thinking? Being a starving artist in a way, and kind of putting everything on the line to start my own little business. And then also, being a war correspondent is not immediately the most lucrative career opportunity in the world. But, this is somewhat idealistic, but I believe that journalism is as important to a democracy, quality journalism, I should say, is as important to a democracy as military service is. And that in a country like the United States, decisions about when to go to war are usually determined by public opinion. Mm-hmm. And public opinion is a product of the news. And so a good example of this is with ISIS. I think the public opinion polls were about 30% in favor of the United States intervening in Iraq and Syria prior to the James Foley beheading. After James Foley was beheaded, and that went all over the news, and rightfully so, most people were horrified and disgusted by that. Well, public opinion jumped to 70% in favor of us intervening like that. And the threat of ISIS never changed. The threat of ISIS to our homeland and to our security abroad didn't change in those intervening 2 weeks. It was the public's perception about whether or not war was worth it that changed. Mm-hmm. And I think as journalists, we have a very important obligation to the country to educate people about the risks facing our country, but also the costs of intervening militarily. And I think that the media in this country has let us down, has failed us.
Well, your story and mine is kind of similar. I didn't go into such an altruistic career, but I mean, I had a wife, just had a baby, and
right.
And I was a captain, 03, living on base. We were on the 10th hole of the golf course in Biloxi, Mississippi, good old Mississippi.
Nice.
I mean, life was pretty. We had every other Friday off. I lived about 2 miles from the office. and it was like, I got to do more. I wanted to go into sales. Like I wanted to be paid for my efforts. And I left that comfortable world, and I told people, it's like, if I have another kid, if things, hang here too long, too many liabilities, it's like, I will never go pursue my dreams to figure out what I can really do.
Right.
So is that, you kind of had that same calling?
Yeah, well, I think I'm unmarried. I had a girlfriend when I got out, and I have no children. I had no mortgage or any real debt. So I think there's a certain moment in life where I could do this without the risk of having too many obligations to worry about.
Right.
But yeah, I think there is, among a lot of people in the military, once you get to about 30 and you're able to get out, if you're able to get out based on your commitment, there is this idea where that's sort of a moment, it's sort of the last moment where you can make a career change, where you're still young enough to see it through.
Yeah.
I think I hit that and decided that I wanted to do more than just stay in the military. Not that staying in the military is not doing a lot, but I felt like I had another calling as well.
Yeah, that's cool. You got to listen to that little voice, right?
Right.
I think too many people, I know I've gotten in trouble in business, had bad deals, and I didn't listen to my little voice. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is you've got a different journey than, I typically have people on, but, following your instinct, following your gut is so important, and people need to realize they're going to be all right. Follow that dream. It may take longer to achieve, but you got to get started. Otherwise you're always living that little voice saying, what if, what could I have done differently?
Absolutely.
And man, I could go down a deep rabbit hole and probably lose a ton of listeners, getting into politics. So, we won't get into too much of that.
All right.
But you have to monetize this. You have to get paid.
Right.
So, what are you doing? How are you learning about web design and marketing and promotion? What are you putting into place to monetize this new news website?
Well, I think one of the sort of the problems of media right now is that the online advertising model is based on page views.
Right.
And so you see a lot of these news outlets that will create clickbait headlines or stories about subjects like Ebola, for example, that they feel will fearmonger enough to get a lot of people to visit their site. And because of that, stories that are more forward-looking, perhaps like Ukraine, because in my opinion, Ukraine could fall apart into another world war very easily. Mm-hmm. But it's not something that will happen tomorrow or the next week. And it's something that's quite abstract for most people to imagine right now. And because of that, it's not going to get the kind of internet traffic that, a story about Kim Kardashian's ass might get.
Are you talking about Kanye?
Yeah. Well, Kim Kardashian made quite a hit on the internet last week.
Have you seen those pictures?
It's concerning when you see
click here to see a picture of Kim Kardashian's ass, and it's a picture of Kanye.
Yeah. That would be more appropriate, right? Yeah. So our idea, and I think, we initially were trying to generate page views just to become more popular. But I think for the type of journalism we're doing, we have to pursue some sort of subscription model, because our content is not necessarily content and we don't produce enough content right now because we're a startup, that will drive millions of page views per month to make it sustainable through advertising to keep keep us in the black.
Right.
But I think to counter this sort of transition in media toward page views and SEO and just getting the hot story, I think we need to find a new model that isn't just dependent on getting people from Facebook to click on stuff. And good quality content that means something, that has some sort of value to the reader, is something that we have to find out, well, how can we get them to pay a monthly fee for this? And so that's our challenge.
Right.
And
it's hard.
There are pressures to, we have venture capitalists who backed us on this, and there's pressure to produce stories that bring in the page views and get the advertising revenue up based on page views. But, we have to walk that fine line of not becoming like every other news site out there and kind of caving into that pressure.
Right. So that brought up another point. I mean, so you did raise funding to kick this thing off, right? How did you go about doing that?
Right. Well, my brother is the co-founder of this, and he's also an Air Force Academy grad and an Air Force veteran, and he works for Goldman Sachs up in New York right now. So he's the financial guru of the team. I'm the talent, maybe. So we went to a couple of investors in Sarasota, Florida, and said we had this idea, and we showed them my work from Afghanistan as proof of the fact that there was something to this concept of military veterans being able to weave their personal stories and narratives into the way they report on war.
Right.
And my stories got a little bit of attention because they were written differently. And also, it's not just my perception of the wars that's different, but also the way we write our stories is a little different. Blue Force Tracker too, which is we weave in analysis into just straight up telling the news as well.
Right.
So we went to our investors with this model, and they believed in us, and they believed in our concept, and they gave us enough money to basically launch this thing and have it operate for a couple years and see if it takes off.
Right. It's hard going against the grain, at least conventional wisdom. I just interviewed a guy, Justin Brook, on the previous episode, and he does media buying and online media buying, so pay-per-click advertising and whatnot. And he does some videos just to get the word out. But he says, there's this Luxy hair or something, right? So this woman, 2.3 million views on one video showing hair extensions.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's what we're up against. So some cute brunette with an accent talking about how to do hair extensions. I mean, how do we... is the world doomed? Is America doomed? Do you think there's an appetite for this, for real business, for real journalism, versus, look at my barking cat and my hair extensions?
Well, I think there's a few kind of ideas that keep me going in the direction I'm going. One of them is an idea from Steve Jobs, which is you don't necessarily give people what they think they want. You tell them what they want. Mm-hmm. And I think with the news that we're trying to present, it's not the news they want to hear, it's the news they need to hear. Right. And there is an appetite out there, I think, of people who are very jaded toward American media. And they crave something different, something more realistic. They crave journalism they can believe in and they can trust. And that's why it's important. That's why I think the fact that we're building a team of journalists who are all ex-special ops, Army Special Forces, Air Force pilots, CIA people. These are people who put their lives on the line for America, and they're applying that same sort of courage and that same sense of duty to journalism, which is equally as important, I believe, to our country. And there's this other idea that, all right, we give people something maybe they don't even think they need or think they want quite yet. But there's another concept. So when I was researching when to send out an email blast, there's all these ideas that you send it out at the times of peak traffic on email, like Tuesdays and Thursdays and whatnot. But there's another idea that why not send your email out like Saturday morning when nobody else is sending out emails? Because that way you're the only email they're going to get on Saturday morning, and they'll probably open it.
Right.
And so translating that into Blue Force Tracker is if the whole industry is moving in one direction, why don't we be the one set of people who are moving in the opposite direction? Mm-hmm. We're going to be that Saturday morning email. We're going to be that news site that is unlike everybody else. And because of that, we'll be unique. Yep. And if there's an audience out there for that type of news, we'll be one of the only ones providing it.
Right.
So I think, in some ways, the trend in media is in one direction, but if you completely counter that trend, you're in the open space that everybody else is leaving behind.
So what happens, though, when this catches on and CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News says, hey, we want to bring you in, take you in under our wing? I mean,
right.
Do you fight that? Do you say, okay, but only under these conditions? Because, I mean, there's no way in hell any of these big news media outlets are going to let you truly tell your story.
Right. And that's going to be a real dilemma for us if we grow to the point where we get an offer to be bought out. Because I mean, I love right now being able to write the stories that I want, write them the way that I want, to cover conflicts and issues that I think are important that the other networks are ignoring. Mm-hmm. And so to suddenly be under the thumb of a major news outlet would be a tough call for us to make. And it would be a bit contrary to our mission statement.
Right.
So I think the ideal scenario is that we become financially sound enough that we can operate and grow and stay independent.
Right.
If there was a deal where we could guarantee our independence through, even if we were under the umbrella of a major outlet, we could look at that. But I think what we're working toward in our ultimate vision is to grow organically and independently and be self-sustaining.
So from the inside looking out, I mean, you're in this world now as a journalist. Do you have any words of wisdom for our listeners that maybe are trying to get press? Have you learned any tricks or techniques to reaching a journalist and saying, hey, cover my story? I'm a baker here in Southern California and I'm gluten-free, do a story on me. I mean, is there things we can do as business owners to get a little more press?
I think social media that's sort of the stock answer, I know, but almost every journalist is on social media and they all have a presence, and reaching out to them through social media is always a valuable way to get on their radar screen, so to speak. But I have to say, as a journalist, you are always hunting for stories. You're always on the lookout for a good story. So there's nothing wrong to just directly contact a journalist with an email or a phone call and say, hey, I've got a story lead for you. I think if you're just putting out press releases blindly, those get lost in the ether quite often. Yeah. But, if you got a local paper that you want to get your business featured in, I guarantee you there's an enterprising journalist out there who's just dying for a good story. Mm-hmm. But also you have to, if you're going to pitch a story, think about from the perspective of a journalist, they can't just do a promotional story for your business. There has to be an angle to it, some sort of hook that they can take to their editor and say, there's a larger story here. So whether you're a veteran starting a business or if you've overcome some obstacle to create your business, some challenge that might make a unique story. So think about how your story would translate into a good piece of journalism and give that to the journalist and pitch it to them that way.
Yeah. It's basically sales 101, right? I mean, you got to have empathy. You got to walk a mile in their shoes. It's like, how can I help that reporter look good?
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you give them a great story, they'll love you for it,
Yeah. And then they'll call you, huh? You got another one?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
So how are you finding writers and journalists? I mean, I don't normally think of an Army Green Beret or airborne guy as being a journalist,
You know what? I didn't before, but we've got 3 ex-Army Special Forces guys, Green Berets, who write for us now. We've got former Marine infantry officers, snipers, fighter pilots, I mean, you name it. And I was surprised because when I went to journalism school, I felt like I was, coming out of the Jurassic area, or just like a completely new concept of a veteran becoming a journalist. It just caught everybody off guard. But as I've gone through the last 6 months of Blue Force Tracker, I've met a lot of other veterans who want to become journalists. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of them out there, but they're facing the same struggles that I did, which is the fact that the media industry is not hiring right now, and it's very hard. As a veteran becoming a journalist, you're naturally drawn to telling stories about the military and war, and it's not, you can't just walk up to the Washington Post or New York Times and tell them you want to cover Afghanistan and have them hire you.
Right.
So we are, I think, another vision of ours is to be a place where we can help develop these veterans who want to become journalists into that new career and to help launch them on a path toward, having an entire career doing this.
So how do you monetize a site? I mean, I know Wall Street Journal does it, right? They've been around 100 and 200 years, however long they've been around. So
yeah. Well, their advantage is that their site traffic is just enormous.
Right.
And they don't have to pump a certain amount of money to maintain that traffic because they have a brand established. So for us, we have to build a brand. We're working really hard to get on TV, to be expert commentators on issues like Ukraine. Like right now, I've been sending emails out to all these booking agents on Fox and CNN and all these outlets trying to get on TV to speak about Ukraine because I was just there for almost 3 months. So, building our profile and our brand that way.
Are they interested? Are they interested in hearing your story?
They are. Well, we've had some nibbles, and I don't know if you saw that Cheryl Atkinson has been writing for us, and she's been a big champion of what we've been doing. And she's also very passionate about independent, unbiased journalism.
Good.
So she really believed in our mission. And so she's been a gateway of sorts for us to make introductions to some of these people who could help,
right,
get us on TV and spread the message of what we're doing. But yeah, so it's tough for a startup because you basically have to pay for traffic in a lot of ways. You have to pay for marketing to try and get people to visit your site.
Right.
So we're looking at some corporate sponsorships to launch us in these next couple of years, finding brands like USAA perhaps who like to link themselves to military causes, who would be willing to put an advertisement on our site, not necessarily for the page views, but to be associated with our cause, the qualitative part of what we're doing.
Right. And
then have that money and that financial income be used toward building our audience base so that we're self-sustaining. And our goal is to be self-sustaining in 2 years.
Right. But it's old school grassroots, huh? Picking up the phone, hobnobbing, rubbing elbows.
It is. Yeah, you really got to sell yourself, and that's tough. And I think it's related to your work. Is I as a pilot and a writer, I have no experience marketing myself.
Right.
And so it's been a lot of trial and error trying to figure out how to develop me and this business into a brand that people want to invest in.
Right.
And so it's been a sharp learning curve, but I think people are responding to what we're doing, and our audience is growing.
Yeah, cool. Well, I always tell people, and I think it's 10% product and 90% promotion nowadays.
Yeah.
The old adage of build a better mousetrap. Even that whole story was embellished, and people don't realize it.
Yeah.
You've got to toot your own horn.
Right.
Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's how it is. And assuming you have a quality product, if you toot your own horn enough, then they'll come and then they'll tell others. But in the beginning, especially, toot, 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 man. I mean, that's what you got to do. Is that why you moved to DC, just to be closer to some of the movers and shakers?
Absolutely. That's 100% the reason I'm here, is to network, meet people, spread word about what we're doing, recruit new writers, find investment opportunities, and hopefully as we grow, we'll be looking for another round of investment too to kind of take us to that next level. So DC is definitely in a place to do that. And then also as a journalist, the stories are here.
Right.
If I want to write stories about the Pentagon, it's just down the street now.
Right.
So there's definitely advantages to being here.
You can call some classmates too, kind of sneak you in the back door.
Absolutely. And I tell you what, it's amazing the network, and as a vet, I'm sure just watching my news feed on Facebook, I feel like I have a much more in-depth knowledge of what's going on in the military today.
Right.
And that's a real advantage as a veteran too, as a journalist, is just still having kind of one foot in that world and understanding what's going on in a way that a civilian wouldn't be able to.
Right. Well, my classmates it's unbelievable, are putting on full bird colonel. So if you need to reach somebody, let me know. They are old. I am not old. All right, man. So if somebody's interested in writing for you or just checking things out, send them where? BlueForceTracker.com?
BlueForceTracker.com.
All right.
Yep. And on the top bar, we've got a page you can click on where if you want to contribute, you can sign up.
Okay.
And we'll talk to you if you want to do something from an op-ed, or if you want to be a recurring writer.
Right.
We could do all those things. And we got a couple news stories a day, usually from all over the world. We've got writers who were living in the Middle East, for me in Ukraine.
Right.
We've got people covering Asia. So all the hot topics And then we've also been doing some investigative reporting. We did some stories recently about General Amos, the outgoing commandant of the Marine Corps.
Right.
Some pretty hard-hitting stuff about his background. So, yeah, we do it all.
Cool.
And it's, encourage people to check it out. I think they'd like it.
All right. And definitely they need to look up your story on the Ukraine. I read that, and I was like, yeah, no wonder you didn't tell your family till after you got back. That was a little bit hairy.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important, and I feel like journalism has gotten away from this idea of a journalist placing themselves in a story. And it goes against some of the rules of journalism, but I was a witness to a tank battle, and I almost got myself shot at a checkpoint in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And those are sort of adventurous stories that also educate the reader about what's going on and keep the reader's interest. And they make these stories less abstract and more relevant to their lives when you can actually feel like you're in this story and you're living it with the writer.
Yeah.
So that's one of the models we're trying to bring back is narrative literary journalism.
Yeah. Hey, I almost got a paper cut on my tongue licking an envelope the other day. I mean, I had to take a day off.
Take your stuff, man.
Yeah, I had to have a beer and kind of self-medicate and just kind of get into my namaste position. I got into the downward dog or the kid, one of those, the child pose. That was it. And drank a little beer out of a sippy cup. And I felt all better, though.
Office work can be deadly. It's dangerous.
All right, blueforcetracker.com. Please go visit, see what my fellow alum is up to. It's good work, and submit a story if you think you're up to it. So,
absolutely.
Hey, man, thanks for taking the time to come on the show.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Have a great day.
You too.
So when you say you're under the gun with a deadline or something, that's a little different than what Nolan experienced. He was literally under the gun out in the Ukraine tracking that war. Not to mention flying his combat sorties when he was on active duty. So I hope you got a lot out of that. He is out there making it happen. Again, he left behind the comforts and the guarantees and the securities. Although, if you're strapping yourself into a jet and getting shot at, maybe that's not too secure or comfortable. But you know what? The guys that I know, my classmates are still in full bird colonels. And they eat that stuff up. When you've trained for that, that adrenaline rush, that serving your country, knowing that you're defending, maybe protecting other guys on the ground that need you to get in there, they wouldn't have it any other way. So, but he left behind that a very well mapped out career to go out and make a difference. So help him make a difference. And if you need to see things from a different perspective, maybe you lean one way or the other from a political standpoint, check out what he's writing. I mean, he is honest. He has given it to you straight. He's given it to you as somebody that's been in country on multiple countries, right, from Iraq and Afghanistan, Ukraine and others. Obviously, going to school in France. He has more insight, I would say, than most of us, that haven't been there. I spent a very short time, 90 or 100 days in the Middle East when I was in. I spent a year in Korea. So those experiences opened my eyes, made me much more appreciative. And I talk about it a lot in my sales training as well, how to haggle, negotiate, things that I learned from traveling and living abroad and being stationed overseas, vastly different. And those skills have helped me create the Sales Whisperer. So be sure to share the love on this podcast. But speaking of sales training, something that's coming up, I'm launching again April 8th. But you can sign up now and save yourself a couple $100. But it's check out theartoftheclose.guru. So theartoftheclose.guru. 7 live calls with me, a 60-plus page workbook. Everything's archived and recorded. You get a lot of other bonuses. Check that out. Sign up now. And before the prices go up, they'll go up at the end of February, and they'll go up another $100 at the end of March. So do yourself a favor, save some money while I help you make some money. Thanks for listening, and remember to sell different.